All right, friends, we're back to cover Venus in another episode. This one is about Venus and the sign of Aries. If you have this in your birth chart as a birth signature, this video will apply. And it also applies to the current transit of 2025, where Venus is going to station in the sign of Aries at 10 degrees, move backwards into Pisces, and then forward to cover its shadow degrees until it passes that 10-degree mark, and eventually it makes it back to its lovely home of Taurus. And with that said, let us begin. Now, I've got two more subheadings that I want to quickly go over with Venus in the sign of Aries. And I just want to emphasize how, I just took the discussion somewhere where it's making it pleasant that Venus is in the sign of Aries. But these natives, and through this transit too, we're going to have to confront some, let's say, shadow aspects of the self with this kind of a placement. So things that we have to be mindful, because these are the kinds of things that Venus in Aries can signify, are, for example, impulsivity in relationship. So rushing into love, short-lived infatuation, prioritizing personal desires. So there's a kind of a self-centeredness that can come as a shadow aspect of Venus in Aries. There can be, and with this, there can be definitely difficulty empathizing with other people because it's always about me and what I need and how I need to do it. That's not a good way to be. And there can be a lot of desire for instant gratification. And when one doesn't get it, or if it doesn't come around, the person's constantly dealing with feelings of irritation, for example. It makes a person reactive. It makes them conflictual. Like if a person's expectations are not promptly met right now, because this is what my individual self wants, it just creates a lot of conflict, and this can bring about a lot of aggression with Venus, the soft, beautiful planet, in the sign of Aries. Another shadow aspect of Venus in Aries is initially a lot of difficulty with commitment. There's so much fear of being restricted, not being free. Just feeling like I want my independence, and this person's, it feels like other people are intruders in our lives, and this is always gonna damage relationships. And on one hand, this kind of a placement can create relationships into a battlefield, combat zone, where it's like everyone's at competition with each other. And you can also get jealousy and possessiveness here too, oddly enough. You get more of this quality in the other sign of Mars, which has to do with the sign of Scorpio. But in the sign of Aries too, I mean, like, if you're under the impression that you gotta win against your partner, when they win, which inevitably happens in life, then you can get a sense of jealousy here. So it's a shadow side of Venus and Mars signs. And honestly, if one doesn't catch themselves here and over a lifetime improve and get some self-mastery in relational dynamics, literally we could say that this is a kind of a, I don't want to be crude here in using this term, but there's a underdeveloped emotional intelligence that it's like always action over reflection, over some contemplation, understanding why are we reactive? Why do we just have this impulse and we act on it? We have to understand this. And when we don't understand it, we can't emotionally grow. We kind of remain stunted, like a child who has a temper tantrum when they don't get what they want to get, when they're not the way that they want to be. And Venus wants to compromise. So it's inviting us over a lifetime to understand this and to grow and understand where the reactivity is coming from. And part of this undeveloped emotional intelligence is also about avoiding vulnerability. So every time things become a little too emotional, when another person asks you for some staying power, the person puts their guard up. They don't want to be vulnerable. They start to push other people away, sever their ties, and they put on this facade of strength. Like, I'm tough. I don't care. I don't feel it. What do you mean? Over the long haul of life, these things hurt us more than safeguard us. So we need to develop emotional maturity about these facets of life if we haven't gained it yet. And if we don't gain mastery over it, it's just a lifetime of tumultuous relationships, pursuits, frequent conflicts, misunderstandings, and eventual disconnection. And one of the most beautiful things about being human and having the kind of capacity that we have for love is to be with another person for as long as life permits, because they become the keeper of our narrative. You know, Aries wants a great sense of itself. A lot of times, having a lover, having a partnership, having other people who can reflect those shared experiences is what grounds life and what gives life a lot of meaning. So if we're constantly severing one relationship after another, our own lives start to feel disjointed. There's not one person who can reflect back with you on that great joy or that great loss of life. There's tremendous amount of meaning in that. So taking pride in jumping from one relationship to another, and if it adds up to a lifetime of experience of this, the person is left with a very disjointed narrative, which is very unsettling. So we have to become self-aware. We have to develop empathy at some point, cultivate patience, embrace vulnerability, and balance independence with cooperation. Venus in Aries will never have the luxury to fully cooperate or to fully for Aries to be independent. These two elements have come together and they have to find some sort of a collaborative effort to be able to meld and merge these components. So you can be independent and you can be cooperative. You can hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. That's what being human is anyway. A lot of us are not living what we think is our ideal self or ideal life. And in those thoughts, in those theories of the mind about how life ought to be, you cannot live until you are that person, but in reality, you're actually living. So even in theory and practice, we can hold these contradictory elements and make them work. So a life lesson then for Venus in Aries, how do you balance independence with connection, is to understand that relationships don't require us to sacrifice our sense of individual person, which is the core essence of being independent. You are your own individual by nature. The minute that you were born, you were differentiated from another person. Our entire wiring is that way. We don't have to try so hard. And in fact, the best relationships are when two people are fully themselves, their own authentic selves, and they just come, and in the middle that they compromise. They don't have to compromise their integrity and their sense of self. They just have to compromise on events, ways of being in the day throughout the years, but not themselves. And in my opinion, the greatest sense of intimacy comes when two people are themselves, because you're always constantly discovering the other person because they're not you. You don't fully know them. They will always surprise you. They will always give you that Aries element of wanting to be excited. Aries is also teaching Venus, because Venus, I said earlier, has that magnetism. So it can sometimes be passive and expect things to be attracted to it. And Aries is actually teaching Venus that, you know what? Love in itself is not a passive act. It's active. It always involves stepping out of one's own comfort zone. It involves effort to keep things together. So over a lifetime, Venus is learning a very valuable lesson here. It's that when things are harmonized, when things are in a state of union, be comfortable, enjoy. There is the pleasure. But only after, when we have brought everything together, we fought for it. It's stabilized. Now there's something to enjoy. So Aries can teach this lesson to Venus. I know the element of fire has a lot to do with the sense of purpose because it illuminates, is an illuminating factor. And Venus and Aries can learn how to transform the passion that's in Aries, and because of the fire that's there, to a kind of a purpose. So it becomes a force for creation. It becomes a force for inspiration. It can do this, Venus in Aries. Another thing that Venus and Aries can teach the native is that you have to learn how to embrace the duality of love and conflict in a lot of ways. And it's actually not a duality, because those conflicts, because you want to be your authentic self and the other person want to be their authentic self, they're actually moments of getting to know another person, and it's actually deepening the connections. Because in those moments, you have to find out what the middle ground is. It's pushing both people's boundaries. I don't want to bring Saturn here, but it's showing where one person begins and ends. And now there's this separation. There's this individual person and there's this individual person. But what's the ingredient that can keep you both together in this middle space that's in between you two? It's really evolving and growing us when we deal with other people and we see like, I can't compromise with them. And there's that conflict aspect of it. Love and conflict will grow us over a lifetime if we know how to deal with it and it doesn't become toxic and crazy. And another thing that Aries could teach Venus when Venus is there, sorry, my computer was fading off. When Venus is there, is we always think about the feminine principle as super passive and it's just shy, but there's a lot of strength to it. Like think of a lioness and their cubs. They are super protective. In the Vedic tradition, we have Durga, we have Kali, the Shakti of a lot of the deities. These are not just these passive, flimsy, whimsical ways of being. They're powerful. So when Venus goes into the sign of Aries, Aries can show Venus as that feminine principle, that power that's within the feminine principle. This is something very valuable too. And I don't care if you're male, female, or what your gender identification is. This masculine and feminine principle is in all of us. It's like inward moving feminine principle, outward moving masculine principle. But Venus as the feminine principle is learning what its inherent power is also in the sign of Aries. And there's a kind of a empowerment with expressing that feminine principle or quality or aspect of ourselves. And it can be active, it can be bold, and it can be very unapologetic. In fact, a lot of Venus in Aries people have an unapologetic kind of a sexiness about them. When you mix the feminine and the masculine principle, they are boldly sexy. I don't have another word for it. Another lesson could be, hey man, you need to learn how to love yourself. Because the sign of Aries is about the individual self, and the sign of Venus has to do with love, which ultimately self-love is the foundation for all healthy relationships. If we don't know how to love ourselves, if we don't, and to love ourselves, I don't mean in that like vain vanity kind of way. No, I'm talking about feeling integrated and connected and merged and harmonized with it. When we have that inner sense and we know what it feels like, then we know how to externalize that and implement it with other people and how to recreate that kind of a love. But if we are just some ugly, disintegrated, uncomposed thing on the inside, and if we don't know anything else, we can't be anything other than that out in the world too. So Aries making Venus kind of self-focused in terms of what it means to love is also cultivating inner love, which then can externalize itself in loving other people. Another thing that can become a life lesson here is, how do you navigate intensity? Love and relationships, the creative process can be super intense. For example, that domain of life where the sign of Aries is sitting in terms of the house that it belongs to, there can be a certain kind of an intensity there. So Venus could be learning how to take and channel that intensity into something that's productive, in being productive in life, in creating experiences that are very enriching. So this could be another lesson that's coming out of here. And other things we could say about things that can get cultivated and the beautiful aspects that could come out of Venus in Aries could include such things as being bold and assertive and yet still knowing how to have empathy and being sensitive. This is a very cool quality, human beings who have this. How do you harmonize independence with unions? Have passion with purpose. Be fearless in vulnerability. Have an energized sense of creativity. Have emotional depth and at the same time have a dynamic expression about it. How to have a charismatic presence, which charismatic here, I'm looking at it in terms of having self-confidence and at the same time having warmth that can invite other people in, which is complementing that magnetic attractive quality that is in Venus. Have a sense of empowered femininity, whether if you're male, female, or any gender identification. And ultimately, how to integrate love and action together. Because our first impression of love is just hand in hand, still in an embrace. But love, as I said earlier, requires a lot of action. So I'm going to leave the video off here. And as I said, I will come back to talk about Venus's retrograde in the sign of Aries and what that means in the cycle of Venus. But this video should just be a general scratch the surface of how does Venus act in the sign of Aries? What does it mean when it's there? What is it signifying? So I'll leave you guys with that. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Sending you much love. Till next time.